Hi, I thought I would take a couple minutes to make this short video to talk about my background with growing food and gardening and how I got here and how the Earth membership came to be. I did not grow up in an agricultural family. My parents were both teachers, although for generations before that, they had been farmers. The farming stopped in my family around my grandparents' generation, depending on which line you follow. But we were historically farmers in Pennsylvania. I grew up in the suburbs of Philadelphia, not knowing too much about where my food came from, other than my neighbor who grew tomatoes and another neighbor who grew fresh beans. For the most part, I did not know anything about gardening or farming. I went to school in Massachusetts, the Pioneer Valley of Massachusetts, which is rich, fertile farmland. But even when I was there, I studied journalism, and it was only years later that I would come back and farm in that area. The first time that I worked on a farm was actually as a volunteer. I had been living with some people out in Oregon who told me about this thing called WWOOFing. It's an acronym, WWOOF, Willing Workers on Organic Farms. And it's a program where mostly young people can go and work on farms for free in exchange, or work on farms in exchange for room and board. And so it's a cheap way to travel for someone who is looking to do so. So in 2006, I went and worked on a farm in New Mexico called Los Poblanos. At the time, it was an organic diversified CSA farm. And the first time I was there in the field in the shadow of the Sandia Mountains with my potato hoe, it scraped against a rock, and there was something in my ancestral body that was just awakened to the history of agriculture in our family and being close to the food that we grow. I went on that same trip down into central Mexico to Malinalco, where I worked for an individual who had a small garden where he was planting gourds to make instruments out of. And so this moment in my life was essentially the moment where my future path was laid out, even though at the time I didn't really know it. After I found those experiences on those farms, I went back to where I was living in Portland, Oregon, wanting to do more. And so I learned about something called an internship or apprenticeship, where you work for a little bit of money. At the time, the one that I found was $600 a month for 70 to 80-hour work weeks. But you also receive room and board at the same time and education. You learn how to farm. So went to essentially on a roundabout path. I went to Massachusetts and found a farm called Simple Gifts in Amherst, right where I had gone to college studying journalism, right down the street. And I was fortunate enough to find this farm that taught me everything that I could have wanted to learn all in 1 year. I ended up staying on for a second year and became a management apprentice in the second year and learned all about not just growing food, but the parts of the business that require bookkeeping and everything that goes along with that. After that, I continued upwards, northwards into Vermont, looking for a more rustic experience and worked on several farms for several years up in Vermont. One of them being Lewis Creek Farm, where I met my husband. At the time, he was not my husband. So we continued to farm for others up in Vermont for a little while, and then we found a land tenure opportunity here in Massachusetts. We leased land for 1 year and then lost the land tenure. The landowner decided to keep animals on the property instead. And so at that time, I had been farming for about 10 years when we lost land tenure and had to make other choices. So it was very disappointing at the time to not be able to do that. But what I did learn was how to garden. We were living in Providence, Rhode Island after we left the farm and found a 10 by 20 plot at one of the Community Land Trust community gardens. So when I was there, I started to learn how to scale back quite a bit into a 10 by 20 area, whereas before I had been working on anywhere from a 2 to 60 acre farm. After that, we spent a brief amount of time living with my mother-in-law, where we learned a lot about container gardening because we couldn't turn her entire yard into a garden until finding in 2017 our home here in Dartmouth, Massachusetts. The entire area here is about 0.4 acres, and that includes the house, the driveway, which is bigger than you might expect, and then a big south-facing lawn, which is really why we chose to move here. So since 2017, we've been using what we learned to turn this area into a bountiful garden. It was all a cut grass lawn except for some wetlands in the back, which remain so. And we both were working for others. My husband continues to work for others, but I have been missing growing as a livelihood and sharing experiences with others. Farming is one of the subcultures that is little known, I think, in most people's minds, but the people that you meet working on farms are really incredible, and the relationships that you build while growing in the earth are like nothing else I've ever experienced. So I missed that, but we were only here with this 0.4 acres, and we don't really have enough space to have a commercial farm. So one night last summer in 2021, I had this idea and this vision of the farm being spread out. It wasn't this big expanse of land, but it was in gardens, and it was popping up everywhere in everyone's garden where they were tending it with their children, their neighbors, their friends, and we were all connecting as though we were a rhizome or a mycelium connecting beneath the earth. And so that's when, at first, I thought it was just a business that I was helping my neighbors to create gardens in their lawns. And then it started to seem like it might be a little bit bigger than that. And so I began to offer an online offering. At the time, again, it was sort of in a capsule as a mentorship. And slowly it evolved into what has become the Earth Garden Building Community membership. I am so excited to see what will become of it, how many gardeners will emerge out of the shadows, out of the earth, to create gardens in a way that's not just putting some things in the ground, but really connecting with the earth, growing food, growing community, and being with each other. And even though it's on a virtual platform, I hope that we will get to see the fruits of our labor in backyards, across streets, in medians, everywhere. My hope is that there will be beautiful, bountiful gardens everywhere that we currently see sort of a dead space, a space that doesn't have life, a space that's has lines in it, as the cut grass lawns tend to have from time to time. So that is, in a nutshell, all about my growing history. If you're in the membership, I'm happy to answer any questions or go into more detail, but that is my short version of my growing history. I hope to see you at one of our meetings soon, and happy growing.